Thank you for your testimony this morning, Doctor. As you know, and I mentioned in my introduction earlier this month, the U.S. District Judge in Texas ruled that FDA's approval of mifepristone more than 20 years ago was improper and issued a nationwide injunction to halt it. This sets an incredibly dangerous precedent in terms of both women's reproductive rights, but also the FDA's review of drugs. Doctor, I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak about what impact this ruling could have on other FDA-approved drugs.
Well, as you know, Senator, the matter is currently pending before the Supreme Court, so I have to be brief and concise, but I will say that we are concerned about the potential future impacts of this case, as reflected in the extensive briefs that have been filed by the Department of Justice on our behalf. This includes a wide range of concerns ranging from the well-being of patients, including women who need access to this drug, the pharmaceutical industry, and our ability to implement our statutory authority. So the considerations are extensive.
Switching gears just a little bit, opioid and fentanyl use is having dire impacts in communities across the country, including my home state, where 2/3 of drug overdose deaths involve an opioid. With naloxone approved by the FDA and now available over the counter, what else is the FDA doing to continue addressing the opioid epidemic broadly?
Really appreciate the chance to address this, and we should all be concerned because the nature of the epidemic is changing significantly from just a prescription misuse to now cartels driving fentanyl being delivered by mail to American homes with unsuspecting parents finding teenagers dead, in addition to the other problems that we've seen. Having said that, we have a major report that's out with a whole host of things that we're doing, but just to name a few, we recently are requiring now a mail-back system to be employed by all the manufacturers of opioids so that when people finish their supplies, rather than having them sit in the medicine cabinet, they can be mailed back to the pharmacy. We also just changed the labeling of long-acting of opioids just last week to take into account that we still don't have the data we need about long-term benefits. In fact, there's a hearing advisory committee going on today to talk about that. And we have a number of other things that we think are important in the future. One that I'll mention that's very important to us is we'd like to have the authority to require that any new opioid company attempting to bring an opioid to the market must show that the new one has superiority to the old ones in terms of safety. Right now, by law, we don't have the authority to make that decision. It would really help us if we had that authority. This is a carve-out, an exception. It's not pertinent. A lot of times the second drug along in a class turns out to have advantages that were unanticipated. This is a case where for opioids, we really need help. I could go on much longer, but I know we have limited time.
Do you want to touch on, there's a $23 million increase in the budget specific to this. Do you want to touch on your plans for that increased funding?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with the data systems that we need and the testing that we need to do in proximity to where the opioids are coming into the market. If you ever want to have an interesting field trip, go to our International Mail Facility at JFK and see the Labrador Retrievers. Senator Baldwin made that trip. But it's just an enormous amount of stuff coming in that Americans are getting over the internet, I think not realizing that often they're getting really bad stuff. So we've got to invest in the testing to intercept this right at the border, have the data systems and the artificial intelligence to screen, just as we do when people come into our airports to sort the bad guys from the good guys. And then we're hoping that there's going to be development of non-addictive pain medicines. It's a place where, in my view, the industry has let us down. I say that having been on the industry side in part of my career. It's a tough job, but we're not succeeding in seeing non-addictive pain medicines coming through the pipeline. So we need to do everything we can to push the industry and work with the NIH to make this happen.
The accelerated drug approval process at FDA can often be a game changer for patients with serious medical conditions. It's a process that's important to myself, many advocates actually. Yet many of these drugs approved through that process are not then reimbursed by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Doctor, what is the FDA doing to coordinate with CMS on drugs that are approved specifically through the accelerated process?
Well, you may remember when I came in this time, likened it to a relay race where we run the first lap and then we hand off a baton to the payers, private payers, and CMS. What we're doing is try to make sure the information is much more seamless, that we have the clinical trials are relevant to what they need. But it's also abundantly critical. CMS does not influence our decisions about safety and effectiveness, and we don't have any authority to influence CMS's decisions about the reasonable and necessary criterion. What we want to do is to make sure people have the right information so that CMS can make the best decisions it can, that it understands what we were looking at when we made our decisions. I think this is an area in American medicine where there's a lot more work to be done that we can, maybe later in the session, we can talk about.
Okay. Ranking Member Hovind.